Another main topic that's being discussed in Book 4 of the Republic, really the most important central point, has to do with the nature of the virtues. And Plato's going to talk about 4 virtues here. In other works, he sometimes talks about 5, but here he's going to talk about the 4 cardinal virtues, and we'll go over those as they come up. Most important is that he's drawing a connection between the person, so an individual, and the city, which is comprised of persons, all in some sort of relation to each other. And you notice that in his ideal city, he has these guardians, he has the auxiliary guardians, and he has the tradespeople, these 3 classes. But you wouldn't necessarily have to have an ideal city in order to say that you have some people who are charged with ruling, or at least they're able to rule. You have some people who have the military force, who are engaging in policing, who maintain order. And then you have the vast majority of other people. In a good city, Plato would say, you want guardians, but the rulers aren't necessarily the best people in many cities. So, how does he connect these 2 together? Is it just, well, there's 3 and there's 3, so they fit nice? No, it's actually going to have to do with the virtues and the nature of them. We should actually say, before we get into this, that when Plato talks about virtues, he doesn't mean what some people today mean. Sometimes when people talk about virtues, they just mean, being good, or certain things that you can say about a person that sound good, like integrity, or honesty, or courage, or things like that. Now, when a lot of people talk that way, they really have no idea what they're saying. Because for the ancient Greeks, and really for most people who talked about virtue, until fairly recently, a virtue means something that's part of your character. It's part of who you are. It's not just something that you happen to do once in a while. It's not that by, being generous and giving to a charity this time of the month, you've acquired the virtue of generosity. You need to be able to do it reliably. It has to be part of the fabric of your personality. And there's not just virtues, there's also vices opposed to them, bad qualities of character, and we're going to talk about those as well. So bear that in mind as we go through this. Now the goal that Socrates has is to figure out one particular virtue, namely justice. They're trying to figure out what it is. And Socrates is saying, we want to figure out where we would find it in the person and in the city. So let's think about this. He says, I mean to begin with the assumption that our state, if rightly ordered, is perfect. And being perfect, it's therefore going to be wise, and valiant or courageous, and temperate and just. It's going to have these virtues. It's going to express those virtues. Whichever of these qualities we find in the state, the one which is not found will be a kind of residue. So if we can locate these virtues in the state and say, well, this one belongs here and this one belongs here, whatever is left over is going to be the residue. So he says, we can do this with the virtues. First among the virtues found in the state, wisdom comes into view. And in this I detect a certain peculiarity, he says. What is that? The state which we have been describing is said to be wise as being good in counsel. And good counsel is clearly a kind of knowledge. Because when you're giving advice to somebody, that's what counsel is. When you're saying, you should do this, or the street should run over here, or, this should be a federal holiday, or this shouldn't be a federal holiday, presumably you're doing so by knowledge. And now which of these classes is concerned with knowledge and learning? Well, it's the guardians. So wisdom is going to be something that's peculiar to the guardians. After all, they're the ones who are the philosophers. They're the ones who spend the most time becoming educated. Now, there's all kinds of knowledge in a state, right? It's not as if these people don't have any knowledge. These people study, say, military science or criminal justice or policing. These people have to study all sorts of things. When it comes to a carpenter, you want a carpenter who actually knows his job. comes to a plumber, comes to a dietitian. You want them to actually have knowledge. So Socrates says, there's the knowledge of the carpenter, but is that the kind of knowledge that gives a city the title of wise and good in counsel? The city is not going to be called wise because possessing a knowledge which counsels for the best use of wood, which is what carpentry is about, nor by reason of a knowledge which advises about brazen pots, nor is possessing any other kind of knowledge. Not agricultural. So what kind of knowledge is it going to be? He says, what is this knowledge and among whom is it found? It's the knowledge of the guardians and found among those who we were just discussing. Now we're going to get to looking at wisdom in a bit more detail in the next video. So let's actually just put that on hold. Point is, the guardians, the smallest class, they're the ones who either have wisdom or don't have it. If things are going right in the city, they're going to have it and operate according to it. What else? Well, is there anything that goes along with these guys? We have three virtues: justice, temperance, courage. Courage! That's needed by soldiers, isn't it? That's needed by police. That's needed by anybody who would keep social order or defend the nation, the city, the community against oppressors and attackers. So he says, there's no difficulty in seeing the nature of courage and what part that quality resides in, which gives the name of courageous to the state. When we want to know whether a people is courageous, we're not actually looking to the rulers. We're looking to the military people. We're looking to the people who actually do need to exhibit courage. So he says, here we go. The rest of the citizens may be courageous or may be cowardly, but their courage or cowardice will not have the effect of making the whole city either the one or the other. So it's whether the guardians have wisdom that makes the city wise. It's whether the auxiliary guardians have courage that makes the whole city courageous. It'll be courageous, he says, in virtue of a portion of herself, which preserves under all circumstances that opinion about the nature of things to be feared. And here we get to some discussion about the nature of courage. What is courage for Plato? It includes a knowledge of what is to be feared. And it includes a preservation, as he says, a saving, a soteria of that. He talks in several different parts about this metaphor of dying. Not dying as in like being killed, but dying as, dipping things into dye and changing their color. This tie, for example. I could wash this tie if I wanted to, and it would retain these brilliant, reds and blues and whites that are in it. Why? Because it's been dyed. The fabric itself, I think this is probably silk. Yep, 100% silk, dry clean only. Don't put it in the washing machine because that'll mess up the fibers. But if this comes back from the dry cleaners and it's now all white, I'm going to say, what happened? And one of the answers could be, well, the color just wasn't fast. It didn't stick. So the education that the guardians, the lesser guardians, are supposed to receive is supposed to develop courage in them, and courage is a kind of sticking to knowledge about what is actually to be feared, so that when something scary comes along, they can, and fear is arising in them, they can say, the fear, I'm going to ignore that, here's what I need to do. Here's the right thing that has to be done. So, he says, we're not talking about the uninstructed courage of a wild beast. We're talking about the courage that a law ordains, the courage of a citizen. So, what else do we need to talk about? Well, there's another virtue, which is temperance. And that, he says, that actually does belong to the tradespeople, but really all of them ought to have it. The ones who we have to worry about the most are the tradespeople. And, Why? Because they're the ones who are going to be tempted to be intemperate the most. These guys are really concerned with, knowledge and study. I suppose they could be a little bit intemperate with that. These guys are concerned with exhibiting courage and military training. These guys are the ones who you got to watch, because they're going to be the ones who are going to be eating and drinking more than they should be, or trying to, cheat on each other and seduce each other's spouses, or, tempted to lay around, or just to pile up heaps of money so that they can buy whatever they want. Temperance, as Plato says here, is the ordering or controlling of certain pleasures and desires. He says it involves being your own master. And he says, the meaning is that in the human soul, there's also a better and a worse principle. And when the better has the worse under control, then a man is said to be master of himself. A person is said to have self-control, when the better parts of their soul are actually running the show and not the worst part of their soul. So temperance will be had in these social classes when that's actually the case. So he says, the manifold and complex pleasures and desires and pains are the things that we have to be concerned with. Whereas, other simple and moderate desires that follow reason are to be found only in a few. So, if the city itself if the entire city is going to have temperance, this part has to be obedient to the rules. It has to not go too far. It can't say, a six-pack was nice, now I need to drink a whole case. Or I'm going to have the all-you-can-eat buffet every single day. We could come up with all sorts of other examples as well. And he says, temperance is unlike courage and wisdom, each of which resides only in one part, the one making the state wise, the other courageous. Temperance extends to the whole and runs through all the notes of the scale and produces a harmony of weaker and stronger in the middle class, whether you suppose them to be stronger or weaker in wisdom, or numbers, or wealth, or anything else. So temperance is the agreement of the naturally superior and the inferior as to the right to rule of either. So now, what does that tell us about ourselves? Well, we can speak of these three virtues as also existing in our souls, existing in our personalities, existing in ourselves. Courage is when this spirited part is in good shape and we actually do the things that are needed to do in scary situations. We don't go overboard and go crazy and just become super aggressive and beat everybody up, but we also don't let people down. We also, when we see aggression taking place, interpose ourselves if that's our role. Wisdom means properly understanding how to manage one's own affairs, how to make sense out of life. And that's something that would belong to the rational part. You're not going to get wisdom coming out of the appetitive part of your soul. Only the part that does the thinking can actually be wise. Now, not everybody's going to be wise. Not everybody's going to be courageous. Temperance is the control over those appetites. It doesn't mean totally suppressing them, saying no in every circumstance. It means saying, okay, but this far. Not this far. No. This far. Stop here. It means observing certain kinds of limits. Becoming more temperate might be saying, all right, I understand I said only go this far, and you've gone this far. Now let's try to pull it back bit by bit by bit. That would be the process of becoming temperate. That's when the appetitive part is actually listening to what the rational part is telling it about how much it should enjoy, how much it should avoid, what it should desire, what it should be averse to. Now, what about justice? We haven't found it anywhere, have we? So Socrates says, the last of those qualities which makes a state virtuous must be justice, if we only knew what it was. So now we need to figure out, where does it fit in here? Is it part of the guardians? Is it part of the auxiliaries? Is it part of the tradespeople? He says the time has arrived where we need to pay close attention. We need to get on the track like dogs. And he says, oh, we've been looking at it the whole time. We just didn't realize it. So he says, remember the original principle which we were laying down at the foundation of the state? That one person should practice one thing only, the thing to which his nature was best adapted. Now justice is this principle, or a part of it. Justice was doing one's own business, not being a busybody. To do one's business in a certain way may be assumed to be justice. So what does that mean? That means that in the city, the guardians rule. The tradespeople actually, they do their jobs, but they also obey what the guardians bid. And the auxiliaries don't go off starting wars on their own, or oppressing the tradespeople, or engaging in palace coups. They're there to enforce the rule of the guardians onto the tradespeople and to protect the city. And when all that occurs, then you actually have justice. So justice is not something that resides in any one single part. Justice resides in the relations between these parts. Notice too that you're not actually going to be able to have justice, not much of it at least, unless these other parts are actually doing what they're supposed to do. Without wisdom, if this part gets, out of control and it's not doing what it's supposed to do, you can't have justice, because they're going to tell the tradespeople to do the wrong things. If this part is, going crazy and, being harsh and oppressive, or if it's not actually standing up for itself and doing what it needs to do, then justice won't be able to occur either. And without temperance, justice is going to be impossible as well. What about in the human being? Likewise, justice is going to be the virtue that has to do with the entire person, not just one part of the person. It's going to be about the relation between these parts. And again, it will be the rational part telling the appetitive part what to do, and the spirited part adding its strength to make sure that the appetitive part actually obeys. So what else do we need to say about this? He comes back to this later on, and he says, we cannot but remember that the justice of the state consisted in each of the three classes doing the work of its own class. We have to recollect that the individual in whom the several qualities of his nature do their own work will be just and will do his own work. So when your three parts are functioning properly, have their virtues, and they're actually in the right alignment with each other, the right harmony with each other, then you can be a just person. So he says, the united influence of music and gymnastic, that is, this kind of education and disciplining that he was talking about, is part of what will promote this. Now, he also talks a little bit later on about something else that's very important. He says, when we're talking about the just person, what do we have in mind? He says, justice is not concerned just with the outward person, it's concerned with the inward, which is the true self and the real concern of human beings. For the just person does not allow the several elements within them to interfere with one another, or for any of them to do the work of the others. He sets in order his inner life and is his own master in his own law and at peace with himself. And when he has bound together these three principles within him, which may be compared to the higher, lower, and middle notes of the scale, when he's bound these together, he's no longer many. So if we want to be a fully integrated person, the goal is not just to repress one part of our soul, nor to indulge one part of our soul. The goal is to harmonize them, to understand how they actually work. That's really the job of the rational part. But it takes this middle, spirited part to make that happen. Courage is not just something that you display in relation to other people or, taking a stand. It's something that you take in relation to yourself within your own personality against your baser parts that would otherwise run the show and rule. This is a very powerful and beautiful picture of what it means to become an integrated human being, to realize human nature. If we look at the contrast, injustice, he says, must not injustice be a strife, a fighting, a conflict, which arises among the three principles, a meddlesomeness and interference, a rising up of a part of the soul against the whole, an assertion of unlawful authority. What is all this confusion and delusion except for injustice and intemperance and cowardice and ignorance and every form of vice? When people are screwed up, according to Plato, according to this view of human nature, when they do stupid things, when they do, as we say, ignorant things, when they act like jerks, when they're selfish, it's coming from within, from who they are. It's not just coming from society or pressures or, circumstances. It's coming from the fact that within them there's a kind of conflict going on. They're not a unified, integrated person. They're at war with themselves. And that war spills out into the rest of the world. So he says, what this is going to lead to then is all sorts of external acts, which are then a lot easier to see. He gives examples of this: sacrilege, theft, treachery, breaking agreements, committing infidelity, dishonoring fathers and mothers, failing in our duties. If we want to avoid doing that sort of thing, it's not just a matter of finding rules or inducing fear in ourselves, according to Plato. We need to actually care about our personalities, we need to care about our souls, and we need to properly exercise and develop those parts within us that are, at this point, perhaps lacking.